Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gary Levinson. I'm the Artistic Director of the Chamber Music Society. Thrilled to welcome all of you to our pre-concert talk, the first concert of the year. So happy New Year to all of you. Happy 2026. We have an incredibly interesting, quite unique program actually for you, more than usual. And to help me talk to you about this program, please help me welcome Professor Till Meyn, representing TCU. Thank you. So, as I promised, we'll tell you something about this program. We're going to open with a Dvořák piano quartet. So I want to take a moment to just tell you that the medium of the piano quartet is a rather unusual one. You know, if we talk about the Baroque and the way the cello, for example, or the bass instruments were treated, in many ways they were outlining the bass line. And starting really with Mozart, who out of the blue decided to use the instrumentation of the keyboard, the viola, cello, and one violin only. We were very blessed actually because we have this plethora of sensational repertoire. And since we have a composer here, could you tell us what would be the impetus, catalyst to take a very new instrumentation and introduce it, let's say in the case of Mozart or closer to home, Dvořák?
Well, I mean, it's always exciting for a composer when they have a new vehicle with a different kind of balance and different colors. So, I mean, anytime someone says, can you write for this ensemble? Just as an example, a friend said to me, can you write for 2 E-flat clarinets and string quartet? And I said,
with humor.
I know. What am I going to do with that?
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. It was the best because they said, we need more of this in our repertoire. So it's really fun for a composer to do that. Yeah. And of course, to be able to look back now at all these wonderful quartets that we have from these great masters, it's a staple. It's
such a great point because oftentimes the catalyst is a musician like Bielefeld was for Mozart. And in this case, I think it was maybe, for Dvořák, it was simply a matter of convenience because oftentimes, even in the 19th century, you're not going to have a string quartet to play with piano. So oftentimes you would write for a piano quartet because you don't have a second violinist and it costs a lot of money to hire people. We know this. Yeah. So let's talk about this piano quartet. This is number 2. If you look at your program notes, the earlier one was only about a decade earlier. But I would say from a compositional standpoint of view, certainly Dvořák here is really in his element. He really understands how to work with the strings, how to work with the folk melodies, and most importantly, how to build climaxes. So our first opening theme is a unison statement. Now, I'm going to tell you something under the hood, and unisons are very dangerous. This is for composers too. Very dangerous for intonation purposes because you're playing the exact same note in the same octave with 3 separate string instruments. So you have to tune carefully.
But there's a lot of strength in that kind of statement.
Exactly, and Beethoven used it to an incredible effect. So let's listen to that first opening theme, which is part of the Sonata Allegro form. We'll talk about it in a moment. Number 1, please. So let's talk briefly about key centers and Sonata Allegro form. This is an E-flat major, and the most famous E-flat major I'm aware of is the Eroica Symphony, because it seems very heroic to play something in E-flat major. What can you tell us about Sonata Allegro form?
Well, how much time do you have?
We're down to 5 minutes.
We could take a few hours. I've taken a whole semester. Well,
free course.
But the idea is that anytime you come to one of these concerts, you're going to hear a Sonata Allegro form movement. And what that means is the composer has purposely chosen, usually it's 2 main themes, and then composed an entire movement around those 2 themes in such a way that we're only subtly aware that those themes, what their importance is at various points in the piece. And then you mentioned the key centers, which is part of the whole thing. If you start in a particular key like E-flat, then a composer has a few areas they can go to for their other theme, and those key areas play off each other throughout the work, especially in the development section where things get really interesting.
Which is exactly what we're going to do, although this is before the development section. We're going to go into the transition, restatement of the first theme, and so there are some distant keys here you'll hear, but it's also a restatement of theme number 1. Let's hear the second track, please.
Well, I was going to say, so by the end of that clip, so most of the way through that clip, you probably felt like you were at home. We're in E flat where we should be with this theme, but by the end, you feel like we're going somewhere else. And that's the magic. That's, like you say, under the hood, the behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Just take a look at this slide, because it's very interesting that the Czech Republic that we know of is over to our left there. You have Prague right in the middle. And then Moravia, you see Brno, which is a place I played and I can highly recommend, especially for the cathedrals. And Silesia over on your upper right-hand corner. The reason for this slide is because you have so many different folk melodies that are regional. And we kind of identified the Czech melodies as one sort of lumped together. But in this case, you're going to hear a lot of different ones, and we'll take you through it. Our next one is the second theme, which is much more lyrical, and it's in G major. So what could you tell us maybe about the key relationship to the E flat major, G major? Is there anything we should know about?
Well, I think so. I mean, what's interesting is this is what's called a third relation, which is pretty typical. But in E flat major, this may sound very technical, but in E flat major, we would expect there to be G minor. And instead, to use G major means it's modal. He's borrowing some notes that don't actually belong. But that should give us some sort of feeling of something happier because it's major.
And also something you might hear on the streets of Prague, because I was there, I can tell you, you hear a lot of modal music there, and many of them cannot read music or won't read music, and yet this is exactly what's really close to their heart. So let's hear number 3, is it? Yes, the G major is number 3, please. So I should mention that Dvořák, much like Mozart, was in love with the viola. And many, many places here you're going to hear incredible viola solos. In some ways, at least in this quartet, he prefers it to the violin. And you're going to hear a lot of it. Okay, number 2 is our second slow movement, and it has one of the most glorious cello solos really in the repertoire. One of the things that I have to tell you about is Dvořák, along with Boccherini before him, really was the champion of the cello. Certainly before Boccherini, and Bach, of course, wrote the great 6 suites. But the cello was not really a solo instrument, did not have the repertoire to really perform as a soloist. But in this piece, you really hear the incredible beauty and the human voice of the cello. So let's hear that cello theme. This is track 4. So this is, continuing our talk of the key centers, this is in G flat major. That's a lot of flats.
And E flat minor, so it's both, again going with the almost folk-like use of modes. And that is a lot of flats. So the whole piece started in E flat major. That has 3 flats. That's pretty doable. If you go to the minor side of things with E flat, now all of a sudden you have 6 flats. The maximum essentially is 7. So that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So this next example actually shows how the drama can be built with these key centers. It's a real dramatic moment where the entire group comes in the C sharp minor as actually a very distant key. Let's listen to number 5, please. So it's very orchestral writing, and you'll see that we can create an illusion of a giant group, even though there's only just the four of us. It's really quite something. The next movement is what we think of as a calypso movement, but strictly speaking, it's not really. It's more of a scherzo and a minuet. It's charming. It's a gypsy melody. It's in E-flat major, back to our opening. And this key, I think in some ways, what would you say is the mood of this, and why didn't he put it in a different key, like a D major, for example?
Oh, well, D major would have been pretty far away from the original key. I think by putting it at E flat, we get more of what you were saying earlier. You know, Beethoven uses this key of E flat. It's kind of heroic. He's not going for a heroic sound, but he's going for a rich sound. Yeah. Even though this is a dance-like, he still wants something with flats in it. So it may not sound like, you know, what would a flat do to make it more rich, but it really does make a difference.
Oh, it makes a huge difference, absolutely. That's why transcriptions are such a problem. Let's hear number 6, please. So the interesting thing about this slide is you can see the Austro-Hungarian Empire and how many different nations that we know of now, like Romania, the Serbs and the Croats and the Hungarians. What you hear here in this opening minuet is this charming little dance. And then what's about to happen is the minuet, which is actually much more exciting. And it's got more of a horse prancing rhythm. Dum, ba-dum, ba-dum, da-dum. Let's hear the... Go ahead.
Well, I was also going to mention the very, very last thing we heard in that clip was the beginning of a different kind of a scale. It's yet another kind of modal folksy scale.
With the augmented second.
So yeah, right. So we get something like this. And that's called an augmented second. Yeah. And that causes more dissonance in there. And so it's very folksy.
These days we identified it more with an Arabic scale, but I think it actually comes here from Hungary.
Absolutely,
so great
it does,
point.
yeah.
All right, so in the trio, as I promised you, this is a very contrasting thing. This is much more athletic and in some ways much more driving. It's not this lilt and this charming way of just kind of looking at music. This is more of a driving rhythm, more exciting. He's building up drama. Let's listen to number 7, please. So you can hear that this is much more exciting, and yet it's happy exciting. It
almost sounds like a Schubertian kind of
exactly.
Elbkönig kind of moment.
There's something very vocal in all of this, and the entire quartet, I must say that he makes the instruments really sound great. This next and last, I believe, actually the next to last example we have is the end of the Sonata Allegro form that Till so beautifully explained, and more unison statements of the main theme. I think the character here actually is quite different than the first movement. It's a little bit more angular, more active, and it's really not built for power. I think it's more built for drama and for more melodic listening and playing. So let's hear number 8, please. So, as you can hear, this is more and more folk music, and you can see the paysage there. It's something that I think is meant to invoke for the people listening the landscapes of Bohemia and Czechia and all those places. I mean, I think there's a lot of love with it, and it's a very virtuosic movement. So it is,
and I think that chamber music is really the appropriate place to use all of this folk-like music. I mean, sure, we know about Dvořák's wonderful orchestral, folk music, but this, I think, folk really belongs with chamber music, and he does it so well.
Absolutely. We have to remember that they play chamber music practically every night. If you think of what do you do after work in the 1880s, you're going to sit at the piano with some of your friends, you read some songs, and maybe play a piano quartet. Our last track in this one is, again, a lead up. It's more of the folk melodies that we had. It's back in the home key of E-flat major. And it sounds like you might forget 30 minutes into the piece, but I promise you, you won't. And it's really the texture of an independence and yet one animal that is the four instrumentalists. Let's hear number 9, please. Yeah, so it's really interesting because even when, not yet, even when we have solos per se, it's in the texture of the four instruments. Really magical writing.
It is. And he brings back this majorish kind of feel at the end, just to really close it out with a strong, positive feeling.
Absolutely. Okay, so our next piece, our last piece really, is by Ernest Chausson, maybe a little bit unfamiliar to us at this series. And in a way, as a great composer, you might say, well, why is it that Chausson is not more represented in the chamber music field? And there's a very practical reason for it. At the age of 44, he was taking a bike ride and met a wall, which killed him. Yeah. So enough of that. What's important is before the wall killed him, he was really one of the most promising French composers. He studied with Fauré. You'll read about him in your program notes. But what's close to my heart is I actually have a small, I'd say like a violin tree to Chausson. One of my teachers was Joseph Gingold, who studied with Eugène Ysaÿe, who commissioned this piece of music as well as a poem and an unfinished violin concerto. So there's a relationship here that
yeah,
I'm very fortunate.
You've got lineage there.
Yeah, it's very cool. Can't ask for that. But he did study with Franck, and he studied also with Fauré. And what's interesting about this is take a look at what it's called. I know of no piece. Well, there's one triple concerto, but I know of no piece besides that is a concerto for violin and piano, which uses violin and piano as one entity, and with the strings, which is a string quartet, which is also one entity. Now, I hasten to add, it's not an accompanying string quartet. It's not about that. It's almost like they're in different worlds. There's the string quartet world, and then there's the violin and piano world. So you'll hear a lot of solos for the two instruments and a lot of solos for the string quartet, and then some bridges in between. It's a really powerful work, and the concept, I think, if I just could to tell a little bit of the concept, Ysaÿe, who is, by the way, a giant of a man, you'll see one coming up in a moment, he was, pound for pound, I have to tell you, pound for pound, the biggest violinist of all time. He was 6'4" and about 300 pounds. So we don't do big violinists, but this guy was really...
How did he get his fingers around this?
I don't know. I actually, he lived well into the 20th century, so we actually have some recordings of him playing. Wow. Unbelievable that a man of that size could have that facility and beauty. But I digress. Ysaÿe asked him for a violin concerto, and Chausson said no, because I'm too young, too inexperienced. So what I want to do, I'm going to write you two pieces. I'm going to write the Chausson poem, which immediately made it into the repertoire, and then this work, which was so unusual. And Ysaÿe really did love it. So maybe we can talk about how do you approach something like that when you have a commission of incredible imagination. There's really no precedent for this.
I mean, I think that here again, this is another kind of new configuration with colors and balance. And the idea of writing a concerto, but not for orchestra, rather for string quartet and soloists, is so enticing for a composer, because you can still get a lot of the colors, but then you have the ability to let the soloist shine without having to pull the orchestra back. And had Chausson lived longer, who knows, maybe he might have orchestrated it and turned it into a concerto.
And he does have orchestral works, and he has choral works. So in a way, I don't want to kind of poo-poo his future, because I think his future was bright. I mean, Ysaÿe was a very staunch judge of talent. He would not have just come to anybody. So Ysaÿe was one of the violinists in the premiere of this. The premiere was 1892, and it starts, this first example starts with an idée fixe. It's a 3-note motive, which really permeates the entire piece, all 4 movements. Let's listen to the first track, please. Number 10.
So that's the whole first clip there. It's just got 3 notes in it, and I find this so fascinating because it's really bold for him to just choose those notes. And just for one moment, just to get a little into the weeds, what he's doing is he's giving us 3 notes that are structurally very important to our ears, but he's also reserving some notes that he's not going to tell us about. So having do, sol tells us that we have the tonic and the dominant. But that doesn't tell us if it's major or minor. And he's going to play with our ears in that way throughout the work.
Absolutely. The next example we have is actually when the solo violin comes in. I actually hate using the term solo violin. It's just really a conversation between the piano and the violin. But we have to differentiate because we have 3 violins on stage. It can get very confusing. And it's interesting because in a way he has the quartet as an introduction to the entire first movement. And then when the violin and piano start, they're almost in the development, even though structurally it's still in the exposition.
And that's very typical for any concerto where the soloist might wait a couple minutes before entering at all.
Yeah, so we get cold and very nervous. Let's hear number 11. Yeah, you can hear all of those arpeggios in the piano, which is kind of a preamble to the rest of the piece. This is a virtuoso work. I really have to mention to you that Orion Weiss, my dear friend, I can think of 3 people that ask to play this piece, and he is one of them, all around the world. It's not just a piano concerto, it's really one of the most challenging things in the repertoire. So the middle section is the string quartet writing. This is more high tension with the piano arpeggios and tremolos, and basically he keeps building tension and excitement. It's rather a driving work here in this area. Let's listen to number 12, please.
There's that motive again, and once again he's playing around with it because it's not just do, sol, re, it's do, sol, ra. He creates this quite a bit of tension with the tritone.
Yeah, and the tritone is, as we all know from way back in the Baroque, the Italians call it the interval of the devil.
Devil's interval,
yeah,
yes.
diabolis. So, of course, the next movement has to be the contrast, otherwise we would all have a heart attack. It's a little too much. So we should talk about the Sicilienne. Very unusual for a late Romantic work to have a Sicilienne.
Well, I really didn't know much about the Sicilian until I started researching this. You know a lot more than I do, but I can say I looked it up, and it's usually in 6. So it's kind of a triple meter, but it's in 2 with 3. Subdivisions. It's dancey.
It's dancey, but we cannot really trace it to the last minute, obviously, because we think of it as a Baroque dance, but probably came from the Renaissance, probably came from Spain, Iberia.
So why is it called the Sicilienne then?
Sicilienne, there's a Siciliano also, so there's different ways of it. But the point is, it's just one of those things that's a very lilting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And as Nick McGeegan, who you all know from the Clyburn competition, he loves to call it a scandalous dance, because once you dance the Sicilienne with a lady, he's supposed to be very, very debonair. Okay. So he loves to call it scandalous, and I
didn't find that in my research. I'm glad to know it.
You see, that's why you guys come here. No, there's no one on the internet that knows more about this.
You won't find it anywhere else.
So let's listen to number 13. This is the opening of the Sicilienne, please. So it's charming and pastoral, and it's such a great foil for the drama of the first movement. Just if you can see there in the upper left-hand corner. So Chausson is the guy standing up turning pages. It's a little hard to see, but Debussy, a young Debussy, I love that picture of him because this is about the time that young Debussy was working for Madame von Meck and premiering Tchaikovsky's trio for Tchaikovsky. So very nice. All right, so the next one is a grave opening. This movement is probably the most tragic, emotional apex of the piece. It's one of those things, it's hard to explain. I think it's in some ways hypnotic. And if we do it right, we're supposed to make you feel like you really can't look away.
Well, those very long, slow notes in the solo.
Yeah, both the solo and the accompaniment. I mean, the whole idea is it's kind of like thinking about life as it goes by in real time.
So in that, for me, as a composer's perspective, I would say the chromaticism in the background has a lot to do with that. Absolutely. You'll hear it in the next clip. There's this wave of chromatic music, which means lots of half steps in there.
Let's hear number 14. So the magic in this, I think, is the economy of how many notes he uses. He really surrounds, the accompaniment and the melody. If you count it, it's like 4 or 5 notes in different octaves, but it's very economical, and that's what builds tensions. It's really interesting that you think that tension would be built by runs and millions of notes, which happens in this piece.
Yeah, there are many notes in other places, but this does in a way hark back to the very opening where you only had 3 notes. So he's using that sparseness very, very strategically.
Exactly. Our next track is the middle of this movement, and it has some light chromaticism, but really it's a difference of texture, and it releases some of this tension because finally you can get excited about this. Let's hear number 15, please. So there's a picture of Monsieur Ysaÿe, the great Belgian violinist, and you can see how big he is. Actually, in this picture, it's kind of unfair because the violin looks pretty big. I actually played that violin, I can tell you, no way.
I think in the next picture, there's another one of him, though. You can kind of see him. Isn't that he standing in the back?
Really him. That's Frank. But Ysaÿe is in the back. Yeah, that's a young Ysaÿe.
Yeah.
Those one standing to your right, and there he's quite young. He's before he was able to gain the weight to be all the way up to 300 pounds. All right, let's go to the finale. This is a très animé, so it's very quick and very exciting. The rhythms here are really, really interesting. In a way, if you're thinking for yum bum bum dum dum dum, 1 2 1 2, everything is tied over. So in a way, he starts with an unstable rhythm, which in and of itself, while unstable, doesn't seem to drag or go ahead. It's a really interesting mechanism that he uses. In key of D minor, which is oftentimes known to be a tragic key, but here is a parallel to the first movement, and the unison playing is really, really incredibly dramatic. Let's hear number 16, please. Yeah, so you can hear that the way he uses unison here is quite different than the opening.
That's very true. And also, this theme is so compelling. It's such a wonderfully crafted theme. It really pulls us in right away.
Yeah, and also it repeats in different incarnations here, where you have actually some more solo playing for both the violin and piano, and then the quartet in some ways supports here. It's a very interesting movement also because it's not all about virtuosity for me. It's really more about releasing the tension of the third movement and driving through the excitement of the first movement. It's kind of a hybrid. It's quite interesting. Let's look at the last track that we have, which is number 17, and it's the climax with all of it. I warned you about the piano playing. It is a million notes, but it's so exciting, and can't thank Orion enough for doing this piece, because it's really a mountain to be climbed. He puts it all together in this finale fragment. Let's hear number 17, please. Yeah, so it's triumphant here, and all of the badness of D minor goes away, and we can finally breathe free. Really a unique piece of music. I'm really honored to play it with my 5 colleagues here. And I think that in many ways, it's so rarely done for 3 reasons. Number 1, it's really hard to find a pianist like this. Number 2, it's really an orchestral work. So on a chamber music series like this, it's really rarely done. It's almost in a way like doing a Brandenburg concerto. It's more in the direction of orchestral music. And then, of course, it is a giant work. I mean, it's 44 minutes. We'll try to make sure you're not bored with it. And I can tell you that we're super excited to perform it for you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for coming to our first concert, and happy 2026.